The most powerful warlord in Africa was brought down by the stroke of a pen, not by an AK-47, killed, but by law. That's the hope that we can take away, is that, yes, this seems like a turbulent world, and we'll talk about this afternoon, but yet at the end of the day, I can tell you, I sound like a little preacher, don't I? But at the end of the day, you can say amen if you want, or inshallah. The point is that we have to hold on to the rule of law. If we do that, we will get through this age of extremes, as I call it. How do you like that for an introduction? They were loved. They had families. They had hopes. They had dreams. They were part of us. They were part of humanity. That's why we have modern international criminal law, which started at Nuremberg, led by a Western New Yorker named Robert H. Jackson. So what I want to do today is to kind of place you in the Syrian context. And then from there, what I want to do is, as a case study, talk about the Caesar report and how it's important that this type of evidence will help us in the long run. As Greg mentioned to you, I had an international project that is going to build a trial package, what I did in West Africa, so it's already been tested, so to speak, for a local prosecutor, a regional prosecutor, or an international prosecutor, who then can take that package and mold and shape his or her prosecutorial strategy to hold accountable individuals who are destroying that part of the world. And then we'll talk about what would a justice mechanism look like if someday there's a political ability to do that, or will there be? That's an important question. And then, just as importantly, I want to hear what you have to say as well. Because they call it crimes against humanity, because they're crimes against us. All right? We are all cheapened by the acts of tyrants who feed on their own citizens. You know, just as a footnote, did you know that in in the 20th century, which I call the bloody 20th century, and I've done some research on this, did you know over 225 million human beings died of unnatural causes due to war and at the hands of their own government? Did you know that of those 225, 100 to 115 million died at the hands of their own governments? And even more so, did you know in the Cold War, more people died in the Cold War than World War II and World War I combined? 95 million human beings. And yet we don't really appreciate or understand that. But the good news is that when the wall came down, mankind decided we're going to create a process by which tyrants, thugs, and dictators are going to be held accountable. So this is where the good news is. The rule of law is more powerful than the rule of the gun. The Syrian conflict is brutal. I remember meeting with the Syrian National Congress back in March of 2011, and we were already beginning to think about a justice mechanism for trying just Assad for war crimes and crimes against humanity. We figured we would start that process in the summer of 2011. Yikes. Here we are, the summer of 2015. You know, it was interesting. It was a couple hundred people here, a couple hundred people there, and again, I don't want to cheapen that. But, you know, from just a numbers point of view, it was a brutal thing, but it was something that was manageable and something that we could assist the Syrians in building a court to hold accountable individuals doing this. Well, now, almost 230,000 people have died, and over 10 million human beings are refugees. 2.5 million of them are internally displaced. And what does that mean? It seems like a very benign concept. Well, at least they're not dead, you're probably thinking. Well, in some cases, the lucky ones died. Because what you're looking at here is, to put this in context, 2.5 million people internally displaced. That's Buffalo and the surrounding metropolitan area fleeing a burning Buffalo east towards Rochester, with combatants hot on their heels picking them off as they're fleeing. That's internal displacement. All right, so again, this is important in the context. When I roll out these numbers, roll out these statements, it's important. It's not just brutal in the sense of people dying or being maimed or getting refugee status, but no one's following the rule of law. No one's following the laws of armed conflict, the international humanitarian law scheme by which we try to control combat through law, like the intentional targeting of civilians. They're running amok. It's Mad Max Thunderdome in real life. To overlay all of this, we have this incredible and bizarre geopolitical circumstance. It's kaleidoscopic. Do you realize that right now, as we speak, the United States government and its allies, who are flying missions over Syria and Iraq and other places, bombing ISIS or ISIL or DOIC or whatever you want to call them, we're actually allied with Assad. Secret agreement, because no nation allows fighter aircraft from other nations into their airspace just because they can. That's an act of war. So there's an agreement that he's going to allow us to bomb ISIS. At the same time, we're arming rebels who are fighting Assad to depose him. Wait a minute. It's kaleidoscopic. If one thing changes, everything changes. We're all part of a problem-solving process. We're Americans. We like to solve problems, whatever that may be, and we like to finish. Folks, I'm beginning to be concerned is that all of our planning processes in the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and in other foreign ministries around the world and defense ministries, is that we're planning, we normally plan from the last conflict, and we project out potential areas where we need to be concerned about. We never saw ISIS coming 2 years ago. We don't have a plan. Never had a plan. And even if we had a plan, by the time we think it through, it just changed. So we will never have a plan. We'll never have a solution, potentially, for this phenomenon called ISIS. I gave a speech at American University, and I asked the audience, and I'll ask you, under this UN paradigm where international peace and security is important, can the international peace and security paradigm that we live in live with a place on earth that is not able to be managed? In other words, ISIS is just there. Or do we call their bluff, recognize ISIS, and make them act like a nation? Don't know. I don't have the solution. But I'm telling you, nobody else does either. So kaleidoscopic conflict is potentially the new type of conflict that we will see in this part of the world and perhaps other parts of the world. And our entire planning process, believe me, I was a senior executive in the Department of Defense once upon a time. Our problem solving, our problem planning process won't even come close to what we're facing right now, unless we can marshal the world and do a World War II Normandy-type invasion on the coast of Syria and Lebanon and literally move east towards Baghdad and conquer it. The problem is that, I travel in the Middle East. I talk to my wonderful friends in the Middle East. You know what they call that? The Seventh Crusade. So we can't do that. All of a sudden, then, we're trying to stop ISIS killing Arabs. We invade to stop ISIS killing Arabs, and all the Arabs turn around and start fighting us. See how this gets really bad real quick? So we're stalemated. We can defeat ISIS. We have the tactical military means to do so, but we're checkmated culturally, politically, and diplomatically. It's an unwinnable scenario that we face. I hope we can dialogue on this at the end. Well, January 2014, I had been working on Syria with some great students from Syracuse University and some great governments. We were working with the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, U.S. State Department, the British Commonwealth Office, as well as the Syrian National Congress. I get this call in January 2014, January 1st, 2014, and it's the Qatari government saying, "We have something here, Mr. Crane, we need your help on." And what it was a defector showed up in Qatar with 54,000 photographs, high-definition photographs of starvation, torture, and murder, some of which I showed you the very easy photographs. I just can't show those photographs in public. I was skeptical. Been in the business a long time. I've been a chief prosecutor. I've taken down a head of state and various other warring factions. You just don't get this type of smoking gun evidence in international criminal law. In fact, the last time we had this smoking gun evidence was at Nuremberg. They had a train, was it 12 carloads full of documentary evidence. The Germans wrote it all down. You know, Nuremberg was a paper case, not victims. They didn't bring very few victims at all. It was just putting in paper, proving the elements of the crimes. So I was thinking, nah. You mean you got the photographs, you got the documents, and you got the guy who took the photographs and signed the documents? Now, who should be a prosecutor in this room? Who would admit it? Well, folks, we call that admissible evidence. All right, and that is direct evidence, possibly, that Assad is committing crimes against humanity and war crimes. So I flew out, and this is kind of interesting. You know, the Qatari government has money, so I didn't fly coach. I flew first class, and I had a suite. They exist. You've seen them on paper. My own bed, my own easy chair, my own shower. They gave me pajamas, etc. And I'm thinking, I'm never going back. So I fly there. My other colleagues, Sir Desmond De Silva and Sir Jeffrey Nice, along with a chief forensic pathologist and a chief forensic anthropologist, along with a photograph expert. We all arrived within a couple hours of each other. And we convene that night, and our objective, after we meet the foreign ministry and do all the diplomatic niceties, is to separate ourselves from the Qatari government and take a look at what we have. The lawyers wanted to talk to Caesar and his case officer. The forensic people wanted to get their hands on that evidence. And so what we wanted to do on the first day in phase one was just see what we had. And that night we were going to assemble and look each other in the eye and say, nah, this is too good, it was too good, it's all false. Because our concern was this was propaganda. We were being set up by the Syrian National Council or an Arab government using our good names to say Assad is killing people, and all of a sudden we find out that it's not true. So I'm going in there with lots of heat shields up. We met initially with Caesar, and he just told his story, which I will tell you in a few minutes. And then at the end of that evening, we all came together. The scientists came in, the lawyers came in. We went around the room, and anybody had equal parts to this. And if anybody would have said, I think this is wrong, we would have probably dropped it right there and gone home. And I bet you I'd have probably gone coach. I remember the chief forensic pathologist turned to me, Stuart Hamilton. He's the pathologist that excavated Richard III and identified him. So this is not this is a man of great reputation. And in his clipped British voice, he said, David, you know, I've looked at probably 500 of those photographs. And he goes, you know, let me just give you this vignette. It's harder to fake the moon landing than land on the moon. He says these are authentic. He says I can actually find manner and cause of death from the photographs. He said, of course I wouldn't, but I would like to. I can tell you that. Because each of the victims, there were about 4 or 5 photographs. And it was Caesar, a forensic photographer, who was part of the Syrian army, whose job was to take pictures of deceased human beings. Like any coroner's office, we have a death, we have to take pictures. And that's what his job was. And in August of 2011, he notified a friend who knew a friend from the resistance, saying, I'm taking photographs that are increasing in numbers, and the bodies are starting to stack in the parking lot, like cordwood. And I think I gave you a small vignette of what that looked like. And he said, I take photographs, I can take duplicates. Are you interested? Well, they turned him into essentially a spy. And they gave him a case officer which ran him. And for 2 years, he took duplicate, high-definition photographs of deceased individuals, as you saw in those early slides. He smuggled them in his shoe. Remember, for those of us that are a little bit long in the tooth, I'm not talking 54,000 photographs, I'm not talking 54,000 photographs. I'm talking about a thumb drive. There's only 4 of them, which we have now seized, and they're safely ensconced in a neutral country for further use in a prosecution. And it was, for 2 years he did this, smuggled it out in his shoe. Now again, in a brutal regime like this, you have the sergeant taking these forensic photographs. Well, when you're walking out of a hospital, every once in a while they pull somebody and search them. So he did this with great risk, personal risk. Finally, in September of 2013, he just couldn't take it anymore. He was starting to see friends. And he signals his case officer saying, in Arabic, get me the hell out of here. I gotta go. So they concocted this, and I used to be in the intelligence business, and the cover is perfect. They killed him, euphemistically. They suddenly moved him out, made it look like he was fleeing, and he was killed crossing enemy lines. They even notified his family that he had died, and they held a funeral for him while he's working his way through Jordan towards Qatar, hence where I stumbled onto this. Eventually, over time, as he's working his way towards Qatar, they are quietly moving his family out of Syria as well. And I'm glad to tell you that both Caesar and his immediate family are safe somewhere in France. Because the importance of this is, along with that evidence, is if I am a chief prosecutor of the special court for Syria someday, I don't want to be and I'm not, but if I am a prosecutor, I've got the guy who took the pictures, the guy who signed a piece of paper that matches the picture with the piece of paper and the manner and cause of death, and the photographs with numbers on it, which you can say, I took that photograph. Again, that is direct evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So phase 1, check. And so phase 2 then is what we began to do was to burrow down. And we're talking 3 individuals who prosecuted. There are only 3 people in the world who have prosecuted the head of state. So we know how to talk to potential witnesses, and we began to peel back that onion very, very carefully, while our forensic scientists began to go through the pictures. And we ended up looking at 26,000 of them. I personally saw 7,000 myself. And we were able to, in a report, which is public, assess that these photographs show the torture, starvation, and eventual murder of 11,000 human beings, which we reported. We also reported to the world that the photographs are legally credible, Caesar is legally credible, and if you've read in the past week, the FBI was given copies of those photographs, and bless their hearts, they said, but we could have told them that the photographs are credible. All right, so we now have the evidence. But the key is that it showed an industrialized process, not seen since World War II. We're talking about, we now have evidence to show there are about 52 secret detention camps in Syria. Probably has changed because Syria has changed, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We only got evidence, those photographs only come from 3. We may be looking at the tip of a horrific, horrific iceberg. All right. So the world, we turned it over to the Qatari government. The world, they published it, and the world was aghast. And you probably recall, for about a month, these were very prominent. Now they're being shown in the halls of the U.S. Holocaust Museum, halls of Congress, the European Parliament. And I briefed the UN Security Council on this report, the European Parliament on this report, of course, our own Congress on this report. I recall the French, who had the presidency of the UN Security Council, invited me to address the Security Council at that famous round table in April of last year. And I gave a briefing, and it was a little bit more brutal than this. I showed them the real stuff. And at the end of my 30-minute presentation and conclusions, the French ambassador, who was the president of the UN Security Council, said, "Ladies and gentlemen, your questions and comments." For 2 minutes, it was like this. I'm going, oh crap, they don't care. You know, these are diplomats. These are seasoned, cynical diplomats who are dealing with the world, and somehow they just think this is sad, but thank you very much. Next briefer. I looked over at the U.S. ambassador, and she had tears in her eyes. And I glanced around the room, and people were kind of stiff upper-lipped. But you could tell they were angry. Finally, the Australian ambassador banged the table and said, "Mr. President, I have a comment." And for 2.5 hours, 2.5 hours, all the rest of the morning, the UN Security Council and I talked about what's to be done, some of which I'm going to finish talking to you and what I've talked now. 2.5 hours, ladies and gentlemen, after a half-hour briefing. I recall the Russian ambassador spoke last. "Mr. Crane, these can't possibly be proper photographs. I'm a prosecutor. I doubt the veracity, et cetera, et cetera." And he yelled at me for 10 minutes, which he has a right to do under the rules. Finally, he finished. The president looks over at me, and 15 other ambassadors looking at me going, "Your response?" I said, "I agree with you, Mr. Ambassador. You are a Russian prosecutor. I'm an American prosecutor. I'm not going to go into court unless my evidence is verifiable. That's what the law is all about. So I agree with you. And wouldn't you agree with me, Mr. Ambassador, that people who commit crimes need to be prosecuted?" "Of course, Mr. Crane." I said, "Well, thank you, and I appreciate your note, sir." So afterwards, as we're all filing out, and I'm going to a news conference right next door, actually, to do the same thing. People were going by quietly shaking my hand, saying, as the Australian, "Good on, good job, good job. You take care of that Russian." So what? That's the point. Here we are now. And so what? Right? Where is justice for these people? I talked to you about 2 small Syrians in McKinney. But now there are people, Syrians, in the same boat, who all they want to do is live their lives to their natural end, and yet nothing is being done. So what can we do? What are the justice options? Well, the bright red thread. Can I walk out among you? Okay. Can you hear me? I think you can. The bright red thread of politics, or of international criminal law, is politics. We need to prosecute ahead of state. I did it. We've got the procedures, the rules, and evidence to do so. All right? I mean, it's politicians and the diplomats who are going to make that decision to let us do it. And we don't do it. Not often. But we can do it. So it's a political decision to prosecute, not a legal one. someday there may be a geopolitical ability given to us to prosecute. So what we're talking about here when I say justice options, we're talking about someday. But I'll tell you, remember Charles Taylor 10 years ago? Never thought, convicted for the rest of his life. He sits in a maximum security prison in the northeast of England near Berwick-upon-Tweed, just on the English coast, or the English boundary between Scotland and England. It's a beautiful place, but the sun doesn't shine very much, and he's not happy. But for the rest of his life, we don't have the death penalty at the international level. He will get up every morning knowing that he was found guilty of the destruction of over 1.2 million human beings. So that was 10 years ago, and now he sits. So what we want to do is someday be ready to do the same thing to everyone. This is a neutral effort, as we did in Sierra Leone. We prosecuted anybody that committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. The heads of the warring factions, heads of state, what have you. We'll be doing the same thing, potentially, for Syria. All sides have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. There's no genocide going on in Syria. So, how are we going to do this? Well, we're working the political as well as the legal aspects of this. Lots of discussion. The International Criminal Court is out. It's just a fact of political life. Russia and China will not let that happen. So we have to look at other alternatives to do that. And that could be a local prosecution. In other words, a domestic Syrian court. And the Syrian Accountability Project has a crime-based matrix that has listed all verifiable incidents by date, time, location, perpetrator, and the violations of the Rome Statute, International Criminal Court, international humanitarian law, which other tribunals can use, and the Syrian Criminal Code. So a local prosecutor can take that crime-based matrix, which right now is probably 3,000 pages long, and understand what's taking place along with the conflict map that we've put together, a narrative of the entire action that's going on in Syria. So we could have a domestic court. We could also have what we call an internationalized domestic court. In other words, we allow the Syrians prosecute Syrians for what they did to Syria, but there may be experienced international help. We have a lot of experience, and so perhaps they will allow us to be a part of this court. A third option would be a regional court, a hybrid international court that brings both Syrians, Arabs, and internationals together to create a court to prosecute those who bear the greatest responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And then there is the possibility of an international court. I told you the ICC is no longer in the picture, but we can create a tribunal that has been prosecuting in Sierra Leone, potentially in Yugoslavia and Rwanda. So we have the package. We're building the case as it happens versus, and this is for the first time, as opposed to waiting it to end and then building a package. So when this thing logically ends, we'll be able to hand over to whomever that is a trial package for them to begin a process by which those who have committed these horror stories in Syria and elsewhere to hold them accountable for this destruction. With that, I look forward to your questions, ladies and gentlemen.